Let's talk about a different aspect of cell towers and beamforming. Who owns these towers? Target Justice recently had a Substack where I got this information from. On the left, you can see 5 companies with the largest number of towers. And so AMT is American Towers. Its market cap is $82 billion. Crown Castle, $43 billion. SBA Communication, $48 billion. So we are talking about a multi-billion businesses. And what's interesting is, for example, for American Towers, 98% of these shares actually held by financial institutions. And what that means is that pension funds that do not play the market, they like stable investments, and they invest through this financial institution, and they're the major shareholder. So imagine if all of a sudden people realize that this publicly traded company never disclosed that the beamforming capabilities are used to torture their fellow citizens. Imagine what happens to the stock value, and therefore what happens to the pensions of the people. Richard, what do you think?
Well, it's a good point to make, Lynn. In our newsletter, we were alerting officially uh, for the purposes of targeted justice to let some of the executives at each of these companies know that we are aware what their cell towers are being used for. The appropriate reaction on their part should be to ask us questions like, can you identify specific towers that have that problem? But that's not how they're responding. They're not responding at all in most cases. We're not aware of any official responses back to targeted justice denying or certainly not asserting that our claims are correct.
I understand, Richard. Let's go to the next slide. So I also looked at each of these companies, not all of them, and I found out that the beamforming is actually disclosed on the company's website. So, for example, this is a part of American Tower US technology and 5G update issued in April of 2018. And this is before sort of the main rollout of 5G update. And they compare the 4G and 5G technology. And I learned that the adaptive beamforming and something called MIMO, which stands for multiple input, multiple output, which expands the capacity of a cell by using multiple antenna to transmit and receive the signal, something you, Richard, mentioned also. So they actually admit to using beamforming technology, which makes our job easier. Do you have any comments about this specific slide?
Yeah, this is an important slide. For future purposes, we want to get clear admissions that they understand what the cell towers are being used for, how the technology is being used. If they're simply owners and operators of these towers, and then they're renting space on the tower to Verizon and T-Mobile and to Sprint and these cell phone companies, the assault is still happening from their property. And I'll defer to our legal counsel on that, but I think that makes them culpable.
Well, to me, it's like a product liability. When you put a product out there or the use of your product causes a damage to someone, you're absolutely liable. And one of the things that we're looking at is that these cell towers are preparing directed energy weapons and putting them at the disposition of the operators at the U.S. Space Force. And they're not in the business of supplying weapons. The truth is that if cell tower companies de-weaponized the illegally weaponized towers that are being illegally used to perpetrate torture on innocent people around the world and in the United States, then the program would collapse, because V2K, R&M, and microwave attacks, all 90% of them come from weaponized cell towers. Richard?
Yeah, I agree with that. In fact, I think it's probably higher than 90%, but we're simply trying to emphasize the point that the majority of microwave attacks that targeted individuals receive, the vast majority of subliminal messagings that are sent around the United States in particular, and the voice to skull transmissions, the vast majority of that comes from cell towers. That doesn't mean satellites can't perform some of those functions. If you're in an aircraft at 35,000 feet, you're not being attacked by a cell tower. The satellites take over at some point after you leave the ground in that airplane. So the satellites and the cell towers work like hand in glove. They work together to continue to perform the tracking and the attacks 24 hours a day.
So this is about Crown Castle, and I found this article dated February 2018, announcing this unique platform that leverages a fully virtualized end-to-end solution and the implementation of user tracing beamforming antennas for the first time in a live environment. Deanna, you have a comment about it?
Yes, well, now you're going to have to be on the lookout for their 8K and their 10Ks on the forward-looking statements and the potential liability, because I know that a lot of targeted individuals with the grassroots organizing that Goji has done, they have been sending letters demanding that the weaponization of these towers. So they are obligated to report to their shareholders that they might be jointly liable for the torture and attacks, microwave attacks on innocent people. Of course, they're going to put it in pretty words, but if they don't do so, they're going to be in violation of the SEC Rule 10b-5, and that's what we're going to be looking at in the next few months.
Next slide. This is something I found from SBA Communications. And once again, this is a 2011 annual report. There's nothing about beamforming and smart antenna that I found in the later report. Once again, very suspicious. And the reason, I think, is because beamforming will be known as the tool of torturing American citizens. With that, I would like to go to one of the most recent newsletters by Targeted Justice, a very extremely popular newsletter. And since we're talking about Substack and newsletter, I want to remind people, but this is a single place where you can both subscribe to the newsletter and make a donation by creating a paid subscription. It's really easy, one click. It gives you a blueprint of what you as a targeted individual or an ally can do. It literally says, what can I do to help? And then it lists 8 actionable items. Below is the address for targetedjustice.substack.com. Richard?
You bring up a good point, Len. So one of the many programs or projects that we've got going on that Devin and Goji work on every week. We want folks to participate in the cease and desist letter campaigns and to help expose these crimes. So I encourage you to visit this particular newsletter. If you haven't already drafted some letters, identified some cell tower owner and operators in a 1 to 2 mile radius around your house. Again, that's on antennasearch.com. We've discussed this in the past. And we encourage you to get involved. You can do your part to help shut down this program.
Thank you. I really like the actionable items. This is not just a discussion. This is a plan of action, and I just absolutely love it.